I wanted to address the issue of the Ten Commandments, or the Decalogue. The word means 10 words. Fretheim, in the textbook, described the Ten Commandments as a gift to Israel. And I don't know if you had ever thought of those 10 Commandments as a gift, or if anyone in your congregation had that idea. In fact, it may well be that there are people in your congregation, and perhaps yourself, who believe that the Ten Commandments belongs to the Old Testament, and since Jesus, as Paul indicated, came to replace the law, or that maybe the Ten Commandments don't apply to Christianity. Jesus went beyond the Ten Commandments, that is. I would like first to look at the meaning of the Ten Commandments, starting with Israel, to give us an idea of how powerful, how much of an impact this series of statements was for Israel. When, as depicted in Deuteronomy, when Moses reiterated the Ten Commandments, he was speaking to a group that, they were Israelites, but they weren't the people who came out of Egypt. They were the descendants of those who came out of Egypt, as well as those other people groups that escaped from Egypt at the same time and joined in with the Israelites. And they're going to be joined by other peoples, like the Gibeonites, that will be encountered along the way. So this group of people to whom Moses was speaking would not necessarily have been most informed about who Yahweh is. They may have simply have been going along with the crowd because that was their tribal responsibility. And the Ten Commandments will give them a picture of what it means to be followers of Yahweh. How do you be the people of this God? They would have old images from their parents and grandparents of what it meant to follow the Egyptian gods. They would have images in the lands that they are crossing of how other people worship, but what does it mean to be the people of Yahweh? Notice that the Ten Commandments are stated in apodictic form. That is, there's simply statements of what will and will not be done. There's no consequences listed for disobeying or not behaving in that way. If you get a speeding ticket, if you go a certain amount over the speed limit, it's X amount of dollars and that sort of thing that you have to pay as a fine. That's automatic. The court doesn't have to decide, well, let's see, what do we do about people who are speeding? There's already rules about that. But the Ten Commandments does not list any consequences. That's largely because it's describing a behavior that is expected of the people of God. It's a portrait of what it means to be God's people. As the Israelites live in this way, they will fulfill the covenant with Abraham. That is, they will be a blessing to the nations, as God had promised. Following the Ten Commandments is not a matter of checking off the list. When there's a statement, you're not going to have any other gods that you follow. It is clarification that you'll see other nations, other peoples worshiping multiple gods, but you don't do that. That's not the way that you live, because there's one God, Yahweh, your God, who has called you out and who is taking care of you. So you give absolute loyalty to that God, and you don't need to make an image. There's no necessity for crafting some sort of calf or statue or anything, birds, any kind of image. That's not necessarily to attract the attention of your God. Your God's already paying attention to you without having an image. And by the way, the name of your God is to be dealt with respect, because God has called you to be His family. Would you disrespect your family name? Would you misuse it? God doesn't expect that to happen with His name. What about the Sabbath? Why stop once a week, every seventh day, to rest? Well, besides giving the advantage of being able to take a break from the tedium, the toil of work, it is a reminder. It's a reminder that you have the opportunity to worship your God, to focus on your God specifically once a week. But it is also an indication of the amount of trust that you have in your God. You trust that you don't have to work every day. You don't have to slave away every day of the week in order to survive, because you have a God who is taking care of you. And you trust that God. You exhibit that trust by stopping once a week to admire and to thank and to worship that God and to just rest from your work. The Decalogue says that you should obey your father and your mother. I know that that's not always easy to do, and there are some families in which there's a real concern about honoring someone who has been abusive. But the point of the Ten Commandments is even that person who is imperfect, that person who is frail and who is limited, that person had a responsibility for bringing you into the world, for cooperating with God in bringing your life forward into the world. So even if there's anger in your heart, the people of God honor their parents. You're not going to take human life. That's God's prerogative. You don't get to judge. You don't get to be God and decide who lives and who dies. No, you're not going to do that and be my people. You're not going to commit adultery. You're not going to betray the covenant that you have with your spouse, injure other people by grasping what does not properly belong to you, by letting your hunger, your desires overwhelm your commitment to your spouse and your commitment to God. You're not going to commit adultery, and you're not going to steal. That betrays a lack of faith in God's ability to provide for you. So, besides not injuring other people by taking from them what is theirs, stealing means that you're betraying God, betraying the trust that you should have in Him. Notice that the Ten Commandments doesn't explicitly say you don't lie. It says you don't give false testimony against your neighbor. Notice that the impact here is, what is the effect that you have on your community? Okay, you lie about whether you colored your hair or not, or exactly how old you are. From the perspective of the Ten Commandments, what's important is, what did you say about your neighbor? What did you say about others? Do you speak truthfully about them? Or do you seek to make yourself look better by making them look worse? Finally, you're not going to covet. And this gets back again to the idea of trust. You trust that God is going to provide your needs for you in due time? Or are you anxious to have what somebody else has? God's people. The people who belong to Yahweh they're not known for coveting. There's not a checking off of the list that identifies God's people. The New Testament helps us to understand this, that we can do these things, we can behave this way, not through our own power, not through just bearing down, okay, I got number 7 taken care of, don't have to worry about that anymore, but by the empowering of the Holy Spirit. That's the only way that we could be God's people, isn't it? Through the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, we're able to live in a way that's portrayed in the Ten Commandments. Notice Matthew 25, when Jesus gave that wonderful allegory about the sheep and the goats. Notice that when the sheep were told, you did these things, all of these good things, to me, they express surprise. When did we do that, they say. You see, they're not doing those things to check off a list. They're living that way because they're God's people. Let's be thankful for the 10 words, the 10 descriptions of who we are when we are God's people.